This article that we're going to read is titled under An Unpleasant Welcome. It was written by a famous poet and author, Laurie Lee of England, who was working, alive and kicking around in the 18th, 19th century. And this was part of, I believe, an autobiography. When he was a kid traveling through Spain. Spain at the time was having a civil war, and Laurie Lee wanted to help the Republicans, and he wanted to join that war. So, again, entering a country during a wartime wasn't easy, and this is an article about that. We're going to read the article together. We're going to look at what they ask us to do. And before I make you guys do anything, we're going to take a look at the example of a student from the Exam Success textbook. So the text was from a memoir. If you guys don't know what memoir means, it's a autobiography, basically, or biography. All right, let me explain to you the difference between an autobiography. So this is a memoir. What's a memoir? A memoir is an autobiography, a diary, you could say. What's the difference between a biography and an autobiography? Biography is a story about somebody, written by somebody else. Autobiography is like a story about someone that was written by themselves. So this is something like an autobiography. That's why it uses the personal pronoun I to narrate itself. Let's take a look. The text was taken from a memoir, A Moment of the War, by the English author and poet Laurie Lee. As a young man, Lee crossed the Pyrenees of France to Spain, arriving in December 1937 to participate in the Spanish Civil War. So I was way off with the time when I said 18th, 19th century. I meant 20th century. 1937, so this is like after the First World War. The Spanish were having a... Okay, we'll get there in a bit. Coming down from the mountains, Lee finds his way to a poor dwelling where he is given a strange welcome. The next day, he is put in a cart. He thinks he's going to join the Republicans. So what is a poor dwelling? It's a place where poor people live. Again, these are difficult times. So he showed up in the wrong place at the wrong time, young kid, and he thought he was joining the Republican side of the Spanish War. Now, let's get the article rolling, I guess. There was a motionless silence when they took me in. Seeing a young, tattered stranger, coatless, soaked to the knees, carrying a kit bag from which a violin bow protruded. Suddenly, the old woman said, "Aye!" and beckoned me to the fire, which was piled high with glowing pine cones. I crouched, blowing out the choking fumes, sensing deeply the moment of arrival. So he finally got there, freaked people out, right? And why did he freak people out? He's a kid that showed up during a war with a freaking bow and violin, and of course it would freak people out. The next morning, the boys marched me into the lane, and the rest of the family followed and stood watching, blowing on their purple fingers. The cart waiting in the lane resembled a rough-looking temporal, and the driver had a cavernous, nervous face. "Vamonos, vamonos, vamonos!" he kept muttering plaintively, giving me glances of sharp distaste. The boys helped me into the back of the cart and climbed after me. "Here he is, the English one," they said, with ponderous jocularity. The driver sniffed and uncoiled his whip. "Horse and cart," said one of the brothers, nudging me smartly. We've got to save your legs. They must be half destroyed with all the walking over the mountains. What have we got if we haven't got your legs? You wouldn't be much use to us, would you? I was beginning to get a bit bored with all this levity and sat there, silent and shivering. The boys perched close beside me, one on each side, holding their guns at the ready, like sentries. Every so often they pointed them at me, nodding brightly. They appeared to be in a state of nervous, high spirits. Let's pause for a minute. The people there are freaking out. You know why? Because the first thing that you would think of when a stranger shows up during war is spy. Yeah, because they have spies. This is a civil war. A war, between the same country where it's divided. So the people, I guess it's understandable to think that he was a spy. They busted him. They put him on a cart with a bunch of boys, and they're gonna take him somewhere. Basically, that's what's happening right now. I was beginning to get a bit bored with all this levity and sat there, silent and shivering. The boys perched close beside me, one on each side, holding their guns at the ready, like sentries. Every so often they pointed them at me and nodded brightly. They appeared to be in a state of nervous, high spirits. So here's the thing. These boys, again, these are young kids during a war. They probably got pulled out from school and put into this situation where they got to be on guard. So, they haven't done something like this before, which is like transporting someone like a prisoner from the city to probably where the military is. So they're active because they're nervous. At the same time, I feel like I can sense a bit of excitement here. Vamonos! Vamonos, by the way, if you don't know what it means, it means something like come on, come on, come on. And they yell that when they hit the horse, so that the horse would, go forward. So if you're a little bit confused by what they meant by vamonos, that's what they meant. Vamonos! Snarled the driver and shook up the reins closely. The old man and his wife raised their hands solemnly and told me to go with God. The little girl threw a stone at the horse, or it may have been at me, but it hit the horse and it caused it to start with a jerk. So we began to lumber and creak down the steep, rocky lane. The brothers now holding me by either elbow. The Pyrenees stood high behind us, white and hard, their peaks coloring to the sun. The boys nodded towards them, grinning, nudging me sharply again, and baring their chestnut-tinted teeth. So let's pause for a minute. I mean, you gotta be really, really hated when you go somewhere, when you find yourself being thrown at with rocks by a little girl. Just know that if you ever go to a place and if a little girl starts throwing rocks at you, they don't want you there. I feel like that's the signal, Well, he got the signal because obviously, why would she throw it at the horse, right? Wouldn't make sense. It's him. And secondly, the interesting thing is, the boys, these are just rural boys, right? These aren't soldiers. I mean, when describing them, you see this sense of ruralness. I mean, look at the description of their teeth, chestnut tinted teeth. So these are I suppose lower class kids, people that were poor at the time. And again, this was during war. Everybody, kind of stuck together. And at the same time, they were all deeply always in fear, especially of strangers. Understandable. Wartime, of course. Moving on. Through the iced winter morning, slipping over glassy rocks, we made our stumbling way down the valley, passing snow-covered villages, empty and bare, from which all life and sound seemed withdrawn. This chilling silence was surely not one of nature, which could be broken by a goat bell or the chirp of a bird. It was as if a paralyzing pestilence had visited the place, and I was to notice it on a number of occasions in the weeks to come. It was it was it was simply the stupefying numbness of war. You see, we've never seen this before, what we're talking about. You know why? Because we've never been to a city that's been cleared out because some bad things are going to happen. What do I mean by some bad things are going to happen? It's war. And if war is happening a few feet from where you live, I suppose the first thing that you think of is leave. And this is exactly what happened. That's why, look at it here. They say, so yeah, it's so quiet because, war is happening a few feet near, and even a certain bell, the sound of a bell or a chirp of a bird could have killed that silence. I guess you could say this is the type of deafening silence that felt to be so loud because there's nothing but silence. There's no life, no nothing. Just death, I guess. Dark morning too. After an hour or so, we came to a small hill town, still shuttered by the shadow of rocks. A bent woman crept by, bearing a great load of firewood. A cat shot through a hole in a wall. I noticed that the brothers had suddenly grown tense and anxious, sitting straight as pillars, then leapt beside me. Two militiamen in khaki ponchos came out of a doorway and marched ahead of us down the street. Even our driver perked up and began to look around. Look around him with what happened to be an air of importance. The militiamen led us to the square, to the dilapidated town hall, from which the Republican flag was hanging. The brothers called out to a couple of sentries who were sitting on the steps, and one of them got up and went inside. Now for a proper welcome, I thought. I got down from the cart, and the brothers followed. Then 4 soldiers came out with fixed bayonets. "We've brought you the spy," said the brothers, and pushed me towards. The soldiers closed around and handcuffed my wrists. So yeah, this kid was getting busted, basically. Interesting description of the city. Does anybody know the meaning of the word dilapidated? Dilapidated means it's old and everything is kind of like torn apart. Just like this town, this building, the town hall, it's dilapidated. You know how you can tell? From a cat shot through a hole in a wall. I mean, again, there's a freaking hole in a wall. It's wartime, right? And like, the boys, as soon as they got close to that area, they got tense, didn't they? At first, they seemed crazy. They seemed excited, and they had this, sense of enthusiasm. But now, it turned serious because where they were was serious. This was the military. The exact military that Laurie Lee, the boy that we're reading about here, tried to join, or at least trying to join. But the truth is that they thought he was a spy. And the boys, they brought the, the kid to the military. Now they just handcuffed him. And this is where the story left us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do next is that we're going to take a look at the, interview question. What are we doing here? Yes, they are going to ask us to pretend to be one of the characters in the story. The question is who? Let's read the question first. Imagine you're one of the Spanish boys on the cart. Okay. Some years later, you're interviewed about your memories of Laurie Lee and the Civil War for a radio program. The interviewer asked you the following questions, and these are just the key points that they want us to cover. So here's the first question. What did you see and feel during your journey with Laurie Lee to the town? What do you remember of his behavior and reactions that day? What were your reasons for thinking he was a spy? And what did you feel about seeing him in handcuffs? And they tell us to write the words of the interview and write between 250 to 350 words. So, what type of article, or at least what type of style and format, should an interview look like? That's the first question that we should be asking ourselves. And luckily, we have access to the Exam Success book. And we're going to take a look briefly at some of the examples that they give here. First off, I'm sure you guys have seen the script to, say, like a movie or a play before. Well, if you have seen it, good, because this is the similar format that you'll be writing here in the interview writing section. Basically, all you have to do is pretty much write dialogue. Pretend one person is the interviewer and the other is yourself. Yourself here in this particular context being one of the boys out with Laurie Lee. Now, secondly, the questions here will be turned into dialogue as well. And even though there are 3 sections in total, there are actually more questions than just 3, because these are combined questions. Like, for example, here, what's the first key idea that we have to cover? It says, what did you see and what did you feel during your journey with Laurie Lee? So these are 2 key points that we have to look for. What do you remember of his behavior and reactions that day? Again, 2 key points that we gotta look for. So, like I said, it feels more like a summary. It feels more like a comprehension, because these are just key points that we gotta go back and look into in the question. Sorry, not the question, I meant in the reading booklet. What were your reasons for thinking he was a spy? And what did you feel about seeing him in handcuffs? So, I guess that's interesting. 2 more key points here in the end. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at the example interview that they wrote. This is the style that we're going to be using. Like I said, the dialogue format. So here, all they did is paraphrase the key points here into the interviewer's dialogue, and they divided up these just like we did earlier and talked about earlier, because these are more than just 3 questions, and they just turned it into dialogue. So let's look at it here. It says, tell us what you saw and felt during your journey with Laurie Lee. Again, this is literally the paraphrasing of the exact same sentence right here from the first key point given, right? Or at least the first key point section given. So yeah, they literally paraphrased it and turned it into the dialogue of the interviewer. So yeah, Tell us what you saw and felt during your journey with Laurie Lee into the town that day. Um, what was the answer? Obviously, this is like comprehension, so if you were manually answering this, you would have to go back and read. But this is an example, so let's read it together. You know, me, because you're narrating as one of the boys. It was a very long time ago, and I remember how cold it was. Lee was shaking, but it might have been cold. He only had a jacket, no winter coat, or hat, or even gloves. I don't think he was frightened though, not until later. It was really hard winter. Everything was icy. We didn't see anyone until we got to the town either. Only a bent old woman gathering firewood, poor thing. Can't have been easy with all the men folk away fighting. The villages were deserted. Second key point. Can you remember anything about his behavior and reactions that day? Once again, right here. What are they doing with these key points? Turning them into interviewer dialogues by simply paraphrasing. So they asked, what was the second question again? About his behavior and reactions that day. Let's take a look at the me part of the dialogue. It says, me, well, like I said, he didn't seem frightened until we got to the town. I don't think he knew we thought he was a spy. We kept on nudging him to get a reaction, and all he did was sit silent. Although I think he understood what we were saying, must have done if he'd come to Spain to fight. He just sat looking about him until we got to the town. Then we all got more nervous. He gulped hard when he saw the men with the bayonets, but I don't think he realized he was going to be the prisoner. I forgot to mention what a bayonet is earlier. Basically, back in the day, you know how in front of rifles, they had like something that looks like a sharp knife or a sword? Yeah, that's what a bayonet is. It's a rifle with a sharp knife type thing, pointy thing, at the front. I guess Laurie Lee wasn't aware at first in the beginning that he was even a prisoner. He just thought the boys were taking him to a different part of town. But now that they arrived to the city, I guess Laurie Lee started to get nervous. The article did show a bit of glimpses of that, at least. Last question. Again, at the end of the day, regarding interviewer dialogues, because a lot of people sometimes they ask me, if these are so hard to write, but they're not. They're the easiest part, especially the interviewer side of the dialogue, because you're literally copy pasting, almost even like you're just paraphrasing everything on, the key points here. The last one says, what were your reasons for thinking he was a spy, and what did you feel about seeing him in handcuffs? The last one, it says, why did you think he was a spy? Once again, just paraphrasing it directly. What did you feel about seeing him in handcuffs? He'd come over from France, and he was a foreigner, and he had a violin, as if he was going to pretend to play it in the streets or cafe and watch what was going on. He looked educated too, not like a farm boy like me. Not having a coat or hat was suspicious, like he'd been brought by a car or come over the mountains on foot. I felt sorry for him though. They put him in handcuffs. He looked really surprised, but not in like a nice way. I just wanted to get back to our houses. Those militiamen were scary. So yeah, he was, again, around the end, we kind of saw, in the main article that the boys were scared. So I just want to say, the journal writing section is nothing to fear. As you just witnessed, it is nothing but a summary. It requires nothing but us to paraphrase. And all we are doing is just changing the format of the writing. The interview is not every time. Do not expect to see the interview format in this section every time, because the format that is given for these parts are random. So it is completely up to luck. But what I can say to you is if it's an interview, say hallelujah because it's a lucky day. It's much quicker, it's much easier, and it's like a little on the nose. I mean, all you're doing is paraphrasing directly the key point as questions for the interviewer.